This is Greg Troutman with Marine Technology TV, and we're very pleased to be joined today by John Siddorn, the CEO of the National Oceanography Centre here in Southampton. John, first and foremost, we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Greg, and welcome. Welcome to the National Oceanography Centre.
John, I understand you've been in this position for just over a year now as CEO of NOC. Why don't you tell us a brief career biography? And I'm not looking for the long version, but how did you come to head this institution?
So I'm an oceanographer. I trained initially here in Southampton at the university, although not in this building actually. So I started here in the early 90s, and this building was built in 94. And then I did a future degree in Bangor University, and looking at physical oceanography. So primarily I was looking at how the currents move and the movement of the wider ocean physics. I then moved to Plymouth Marine Laboratory, which is further down the coast, to look at modelling that, so using computer models to understand how the ocean behaves. For the bulk of my career, though, I was at the Met Office. So as most people understand, the climate and understanding climate is critically dependent on people modelling what might happen in the future. So understanding past history of the ocean, bringing the observations together with the understanding of the processes to create predictive models, and then pushing those models forward in time to understand what might happen either the next few weeks for the weather forecast or the next years, decades, whatever for climate. So I spent a good part of my time looking at coastal ocean processes and then modelling them so that we could understand what was going to happen in the coastal ocean. But increasingly looking also at then how do we couple those to atmosphere models? So weather predictions are dependent not only on what happens in the atmosphere, they're fundamentally dependent on what happens in the ocean. And I'll come back to that in a second, because I think that's critical to the work we do here, is really understanding that link between weather and ocean, not only on long timescales for climate, but also on the short timescales for what happens today here. This sunshine, whether it's raining or not, is critically dependent on what's happening in the ocean. So anyway, I spent most of my career developing models to understand what's going on in the ocean. And then there's been a change over the last few years, I think, in oceanography to really focus a lot more on the digital. There are new digital approaches, AI, the growth of autonomy, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more, is also the growth of digital approaches. The two things go together. And NOC was really understood the fact that we needed to grow our digital approaches here. So I was recruited to start developing a more concerted effort around digital oceanography, essentially it was called. So I spent some time here in NOC developing the digital oceanography capacity, and then this opportunity as chief executive came up, and I was lucky enough to be asked to do what I think is the best job in the world.
Okay, no, again, that's a perfect segue to my next question, because obviously being in the top spot, that's obviously a seat of honor, and it's I'm sure a lot of responsibility. But I guess when you look at the position that you earned, what specifically attracted you to NOC?
Well, so NOC is unusual in the sense that it does such a wide range of things in terms of the science it does, but it also does a really wide range of the engineering and the development of the underpinning capabilities that support that science. So everything exists in this building in the sense that we have the ships. You need ships to collect the observations. We also have, though, the really cutting-edge novel technologies around the autonomy, and those ships and autonomy coming together with the sort of fixed point moorings give us that picture, or at least a very big part of that picture of what the ocean is doing. So we have the underpinning observations and the capability to develop the observations, but we also have that co-located with the great scientists. So it's an organisation that is really, it's about changing our understanding of how the ocean works, but driving the use of that information so that society gets the benefit of it. We're very much at that interface between the science and how people respond to that science. So things like, I mentioned climate earlier, things like how does society, how does government respond to our understanding of climate? We're fundamental to that. But also at a more day-to-day policy level, what happens in terms of pollution, biodiversity, all those key problems that society really needs answers to, at least the ones that relate to the ocean, we're here to answer, and we're here working closely with government and the public to ensure the knowledge is out there. And industry is perhaps a more new area for us to be engaging, but actually industry has a big role to play in this as well. The blue economy is growing dramatically. We are working quite closely with a lot of industrial players to make sure that we have both the technologies. We'll talk about autonomy and how that's supporting the blue economy, how those technologies can really help the blue economy and industries, but also how we can make sure that industry works in a sustainable way, so the marine environment does not continue to be denuded and destroyed by human activity.
When you look at NOC, when you look at the assets under your guidance, what's it look like today?
So we have the two ships. They're both at sea at the moment. One ship has been in the Mediterranean. It's been stationed over a caldera, a submarine volcano, and it's been looking at how the changes in activity in the subsurface affect submarine activity. So how do gravity waves, for example, flow within that volcanic region, and that's really fundamental actually to understanding the security of our cables. So much of what's going on in terms of information, in terms of data, but also in terms of physical stuff comes through submarine cables. And in these days of geopolitical instability, the security of those cables is really critical. For countries like the UK, but for everyone actually. So we do a lot of work around what the sighting those cables means and how the activity of the seabed might affect that. And in fact, the other ship we have two ships. The other ship, the Discovery and the James Cook. The other ship has just been in the middle of the Atlantic, looking at processes by which carbon is exported through the surface of the ocean, through the biota, and down into the deep ocean. And that's really critical to understanding what happens as we put carbon into the atmosphere. What happens to that carbon? How quickly does it get recycled? Does it come back into the atmosphere? Does it get completely sequestered? Does it get completely removed from the system? And how is that going to change under future climate? That's fundamental to understanding what the world will look like in 10 years' time, essentially.
Again, you talked about the two ships. Obviously, they're large, capital intensive assets. Obviously, it has importance to NOC. It has importance to the UK. It has importance to the world and that science community. And I know you discussed the specific projects, but when you consider the importance of those two assets to those three main, quote unquote, I'll call them stakeholders. They're not really, but I mean, in your mind, I guess, what do you consider their core value?
Yeah, it's a very live topic at that moment, of course, because there are two dimensions to that. There's what value, three dimensions in fact. What value does that bring in terms of the science, in terms of the data? What cost does that come at in terms of dollars, pounds, and what cost does that come at in terms of carbon? And of course, the growth of autonomy gives us opportunities to explore how one might collect that data slightly differently. It's really clear, and you speak to anyone in oceanography, it's really clear that we just don't have enough data in the ocean. You think about the scale of the ocean, it's not only 72% of the Earth's surface, but it's deep. So there's a three-dimensional space we've got to look at. We can't get into the ocean depths through satellites. So we have to understand what's going on in the ocean better than we do now. Ships are presently the only way we can get out into the deep ocean in a consistent way, carrying large payloads. There are some elements of autonomy now that are moving in that direction, but largely they work in synergy rather than separately. You can use your ships to transport autonomy, and the way I see it in the future being the growth of this sort of activity is that you'll have ships and autonomy scaling up, where perhaps ships aren't necessarily doing all of the heavy lifting in terms of gathering the data, but they are doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of getting kit into the right place, and they are absolutely fundamental to making sure we can keep pushing the boundaries of what we can measure. You can't do novel engineering at 4,000 meters on a submersible. You can do it 10,000 miles away from a coastline on a ship with people on board, testing things, checking things are working. So you need the ships to progress science, even where autonomy is a partner in that. So I see those two things as being fundamentally aligned for very, very much the coming decades.
No, it's an interesting perspective, and as we kind of briefly discussed before we actually started recording, I'm always trying to balance the quote unquote future with the quote unquote today, the real and the now. Can you, I guess, put in perspective? Obviously, there are so many strides being made in autonomy. I was just down in your vehicles lab yesterday, actually, for a nice behind-the-scenes tour, which was incredible. But can you put it in perspective? And again, you can use the metrics or the guidance of your choice, but I'm looking to kind of see where we're at today in the collection, the ability to use that type of autonomy, and basically not when, I don't want to put a specific time on it, but I guess what's the timeline for your mind?
Yeah. So where we are with autonomy, if you look back at, I mentioned earlier that I studied here in the 90s in Southampton. I could not have imagined that you would have been able to put sensors of the type we have now onto vehicles of the scale that these things are. We can do chemistry, we can do DNA, eDNA, we can do an awful lot of things off autonomy. And we've miniaturized an awful lot of it. The power consumption is coming down all the time. So I think we are at a stage where autonomy is there's a bit of an inflection point, and autonomy can really do far more than it would have been capable of even 5 years ago. So I think there's a massive growth of both the capacity for autonomy to do things, but also for the need as we develop more and more activity in the marine sectors, with more and more infrastructures in the marine environment. There is going to be an increasing need to monitor at scale. There is also the ambition under the 30 by 30 ambition to really understand what's going on in the deep ocean for understanding the future of ecology and biodiversity. None of that is going to be done by people. You just can't, the manual nature of how we've done things in the past is just not going to solve the problems of the future. So autonomy is very much the solution of the coming decades, absolutely. But we mustn't forget, going back to what I said earlier, we mustn't forget that those come off the back of the cutting edge, the novel new things that probably won't be miniaturized up until the point at which you can scale them.
Yeah.
So there's a question of scale and how you achieve scale, and to achieve scale you need to start off doing things that are novel and interesting, and therefore you need people, and you need platforms on which those people can stand and act.
Every job has its challenges. So when you sit in this seat now that you've occupied for 1 year plus, and you look back of, I guess, what you thought it was going to be coming in, and you look at what it is now, what do you consider to be your greatest challenges, and how are you investing time or effort to meet those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the greatest challenge is to make sure that NOC is doing the thing that is going to be the right thing for the next 10, 20, 30 years. We cannot be backward looking. We've got to be seen, and we've got to be able to answer the questions that society really cares about. And that means making sure we are really active in making sure that we understand the bits of the ocean that really have critical importance for people. Yeah. For making sure people are safe now, so hazards, the things that happen that the increasing problematic extreme weather events, so on. We've got to be able to understand those things for people now, but also we need to understand how that's all going to change in the future, so our children and grandchildren don't end up with a world that's worse than the one we're in, basically.